When seated at a long table, there's no familiar plate or personal fork. You're not even sure if that hunk of bread under the meat is actually yours. In the Middle Ages, the question, "What do you eat from?" wasn't about comfort. The answer told everyone who you really were. The dinner table was a map of the social ladder. One person ate from a wooden bowl, another from pewter, a third from silver. While some reached into shared bowls with bare hands, others used a utensil that was considered an act of sheer audacity. Today, we'll break down how bread became social currency, the knife a tool of control, and how salt drew the geometry of humiliation. We'll start with one object, something you could either eat or give away as a bribe to heaven itself. Sacred scraps, the edible plate. Let's begin at the very bottom, the foundation. The Middle Ages were a system of resource distribution, and its symbol was the trencher, a thick, stale slab of bread. But don't mistake this for poverty. The trencher was a legal document, sitting right there on your table. For a peasant, the trencher was the ultimate dream. It soaked up fat, sauce, and the blood of roasted meat. Eating your trencher meant getting every last calorie. That was survival, pure and simple. But move higher up the ladder. For a lord, eating his own trencher meant admitting he was a starving beggar. The rich left their juice-soaked bread untouched. They wanted to invest in the afterlife. After the feast, servants collected greasy scraps for the poor. Beggars waited at the gates. Giving away his dirty bread, an aristocrat bought himself a seat in heaven. The trencher was the currency the rich used to pay God for their sins. The more fat left on your bread, the more generous your charity looked from above. There was no ecology here, no convenience, just a harsh contract. The rich displayed excess. The poor displayed their dependence. Your plate was simply what you could afford not to eat. Even here a strange paradox appears. You could eat your plate or share your bowl. Almost everything belonged to several people at once. Almost everything, except for one small object you carried with you your entire life. The soul's tool, your personal spoon. If the trencher was your foundation, the spoon was your soul. In a world where almost everything was shared, the spoon was the only truly intimate object you owned. You might share a bed with 5 brothers or a bowl with a stranger at a tavern, but your spoon? You never gave that to anyone. The spoon didn't belong to the table. It belonged to the person. Given at baptisms, it was sometimes placed inside the grave. A pilgrim or soldier might not have a spare shirt, but inside a sheath on his belt, there was always a spoon. The material of that spoon told everyone your place in the world. The poor swallowed their porridge with porous wood, which soaked up the smells of decades. Those a bit wealthier used horn, smooth, didn't heat up, and left the taste of food untouched. But a silver spoon? That wasn't just luxury. It was a guarantee that your dinner wouldn't taste like old bull or rotten beechwood. Your spoon was your signature. Losing it meant falling out of society, becoming invisible to the common pot of life. But if the spoon is your last personal fortress, what happens when you hold an object that can not only feed you, but also wound you? Arrogant prongs, the sin of the fork. In 12th century Paris or London, the knife was the main utensil, a universal soldier. You cut meat with it, defended yourself in a brawl, and brought food to your mouth with it. Eating with your hands didn't mean you were dirty. It meant you were part of the group. Shared bowls and hands were symbols of unity. The knife on the table was always sharp, so that at any moment the feast could turn into a tribunal, an exposed blade in front of your face. That's a reminder of how fragile peace really is. Later, when power became absolute and kings paranoid, they started rounding knife tips. And right here, on the border between shared hands and the personal spoon, appears an object that tears the communal table apart. It doesn't just help you eat. It changes the distance between a person and their food, and therefore, the distance between a person and power. Today, the fork is normal, but in the Middle Ages, it was a declaration of independence that society flatly rejected. And then Italy enters the scene. Paradoxically, the Venetian doges started using forks. To a northern knight, this looked like spitting right in the face of tradition, because the fork breaks contact. It makes the meal sterile, individual, too clean. The opposition to the fork wasn't technical, it was theological. God gave you hands, man made the fork. Using a fork meant declaring, I am too good for this world. I will not touch God's gifts with my actual fingers. That was the highest form of arrogance. The fork is the first step toward the solitude we now call personal space. Imagine this. You chose the right utensil, kept your distance, and didn't break the theology of the table, but you can still lose just by sitting in the wrong spot. In the Middle Ages, it wasn't just what you ate from that mattered, it was also where the salt cellar stood. Pewter traps, seating and humiliation. If you think sitting at a table is just about finding an empty seat, you're wrong. Your place was decided by the salia, a giant, often golden salt container. Salt was expensive and strategic. At the table it served as the equator. The host sat above the salt. Those he despised or saw as temporary allies sat below the salt. If you sat in the wrong place, they could escort you out by the arms. That was public humiliation, and it could only be washed away with blood. The material of your dishware screamed your credit rating to the whole room. Wood meant silence and obscurity. A simple life with no ambitions, a bowl that lasts longer than anyone remembers its owner's name. Pewter already claimed a step up in status, but it was a trap. We all love legends of mad kings, supposedly poisoned by the lead in their pewter cups. The reality is more brutal, far more prosaic. Tableware was a tool of control. A lord's silver and gold didn't just shine, they deliberately blinded his vassals, proving that this man had enough resources to turn a feast into a military campaign at a moment's notice. Because you weren't just eating from gold, you were eating from your own gold reserve. If war broke out, that tableware got melted down into coins. A lord's dinner was a display of his military budget, laid out right there on the tablecloth. But even if you sit above the salt, eat from silver, and show off your excess, that doesn't mean you're safe from the shadows of power. The more precious your cup, the more closely people watch it. The richer the table, the more reasons your enemies have to turn it into a trap. Because at the very top of power, tableware stops being a status symbol and becomes a target. Poison detectors, unicorns at dinner. The higher you climbed the social ladder, the more dangerous your food became. At the peak of power, your plate turned into a lie detector. Poisoning your enemy at the table? That's classic medieval true crime. So tableware grew magical and technical defenses. Cups made of unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, were considered the ultimate protection. People believed this material neutralized poison, or that it would start to sweat if the drink was dangerous. Fortunes were paid for such cups. They were gifted to monarchs as political guarantees of loyalty. Next to them on the table appeared so-called serpent tongues, fossilized shark teeth that supposedly changed color or cracked when they touched poison. They were built into the rims of cups or dropped into wine as a threat detector. Magic here worked just as well as technology. Even if the tooth didn't darken, its mere presence created the illusion of control over fear. Imagine the king's state of mind. The finest delicacies in the world are in front of him, but he can't take a single sip until his taster has drunk from the exact same cup. Power means you own the whole world, but you're afraid of your own plate. Dinner turns into a complex assembly line. The server, the carver, the cupbearer, each one a link in a chain, and if one link is bribed, the history of an empire changes. Tableware here is the last line of defense. If your cup doesn't sweat from poison, you live one more day. But what happens when a person is stripped not just of the right to gold or silver, but of the very ability to have their own plate? The Holy Grail, the ultimate cup. The most expensive tableware in the Middle Ages was the plate you didn't have. Not having your own plate wasn't technological backwardness, it was a way to keep you on a leash. In the modern world, my plate is the border of myself. In the Middle Ages, you drank from a single cup passed around the circle. That was a loyalty test. Refusing to take a sip from the cup the Baron just passed you? That meant declaring war. You literally let someone else's microflora into your body, just to prove you trusted them. Your biological safety was sacrificed for social stability. The entire culture of that time revolved around searching for one perfect cup, the Holy Grail. People believed an object's shape changed the essence of its contents. Ordinary wine in the right cup becomes the blood of God. Tableware wasn't a dead object, it was a conductor of grace. Stealing a church chalice was punishable by death. It wasn't about the metal, it was severing the link between heaven and earth. The medieval table was not a place of chaos, it was a perfectly tuned mechanism for keeping people in their places. Trenchers fed the poor, forks separated the elite from the crowd, and salt drew the line between master and servant. Today we all eat from identical white plates, confident that the era of above the salt is long gone. But then VIP rooms appear, designer tableware, private restaurants, and the old game of status returns to the table. What do you think? Which object at the medieval table gave a person more power? A silver plate, the seat above the salt, or the right to be the first one to drink from the cup? Write it in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more fascinating details of history coming your way.